Welcome to the Gently Used Human podcast. Today, I am thrilled to introduce someone who is making waves in the world of emotional healing, Rachel Kaplan. Rachel is a psychotherapist, emotional educator, and host of the Healing Feeling Sht Show podcast. What a title. She's also the author of the amazing book, Feel, Heal, and Let That Sht Go, which introduces the concept of emotional potty training. And yes, it's exactly as clever and transformative as it sounds. Rachel's work is all about helping us reconnect with our emotional selves, something many of us have never truly learned how to do. We were never really taught how to process and release emotions in a healthy way. And that emotional buildup, much like physical tension, often causes us pain, stress, and disconnection. As someone who has spent decades exploring the intersection of emotions, trauma, and healing, I can tell you Rachel's approach beautifully aligns with what I've learned on this journey. That much of our emotional pain stems from avoidance, repression, and an untrained relationship with our feelings. For years, I knew what emotions were, but I wasn't always in touch with how I feel them. I remember a period when I could cognitively understand my emotions, but had a hard time truly sitting with them and letting them flow through me. I've worked with so many people who are in the same space, struggling to access their full emotional range. And Rachel's work offers such a practical and relatable way to break through that. What I love about Rachel's work is that it's not just about healing old trauma, though that's part of it. It's also about cultivating an ongoing healthy relationship with our emotions, just like we do with our bodies. We all carry emotional baggage, but Rachel shows us with the right tools we can actually release it and move forward, lighter, freer, and more ourselves. Yes, please. In today's episode, we're going to dive into Rachel's personal journey, explore the concept of emotional potty training, and discuss practical tools you can use to feel more connected to yourself. Whether you're someone who struggles with emotional overwhelm or feels disconnected and numb, this conversation will inspire and empower you to start letting go of what's weighing you down. Let's get this party started. Rachel, welcome to the Gently Used Human podcast. I think we should always sing it.
Woo! Thank you.
Welcome, and thank you so much for coming. It's such a pleasure to have you.
I'm really honored.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm excited to talk to you about all things emotional potty training.
Woo!
Before we dive into this delicious subject matter, I'm wondering, maybe we can start with what is one of those emotion things you talk so much about in your new book?
Just anything?
Yeah. What's that emotion thing that those human people have and wear them down and they avoid and they doing all the things with those things or not doing all those things with those things called emotions?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think as organisms, we are somehow wired to want to avoid pain.
Yeah.
And, most people are really into that, avoiding it. And then when we were tiny, just to weave in the emotional potty training right from the get-go, when we were little and we had that urge, we had to, poop. As soon as we were old enough, our parents taught us, or our caregivers taught us how to not have that feeling.
Yeah.
And we learned that. And so we know that the only way to not have that feeling is to go to the appropriate place, which for most of us is a toilet, and not take, but leave a poop, right? And so most of us don't eat and smoke and post and distract or consume our way away from that signal. And emotions, as you ask, are similarly intense clusters of sensations that roll through the body when allowed in squads. They roll together. But unfortunately, our parents or caregivers, even with the most love in their heart, they said, shh, you're okay. Or they said, there's nothing to be afraid of. Or they said, stop crying. Or worst case scenario, I'll give you something to cry about. And so we learned because we knew as tiny little animals that we needed their closeness to survive. And so if we cried a lot, or if we expressed ourselves sensitively or dramatically, and they went further away or became angry with us, we were invested at a survival level to do anything we could to not be that way.
Yeah.
and to not express that feeling. And so all of us learned, whether it's because they gave us a lollipop or put us in front of a screen. And then, of course, our economy and culture is literally funded by us wanting to consume and distract our way away from our humanity. All of us learned or basically unlearned how to let this organic homeostasis maintaining system, the emotional system, is one of the body's brilliant systems to keep us present, to move things when we need to, like sweating and pooping and peeing. And so most of us got in the way of that. And by the time someone might pick up a self-help book or be listening to the Gently Used Human podcast, people have usually decades of unprocessed emotional pain that they can barely feel, but it's wreaking havoc on their lives because there's no way to be in your body in a peaceful way if you're not willing to have the human emotions that come with your body. So that's where I'll start.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so interesting because I personally grew up and shoved, I would call it the emotional constipation, and never really got the potty training. I remember as a young 20-something-year-old, like having this point in my life where I was like, I don't actually know what an emotion is. Like I have a cognitive idea, but I'm not sure on a feeling level. I've had like these cathartic experiences that were like emotional waterfalls, but I'm not sure like I've ever like had it situated in myself that I could feel it. And it was such a mystery to me.
I get that. I think most people are in that situation. And by the way, I am not implying anyone. I think almost no one got emotionally potty trained when they were little. But so I don't think I think the sad truth is that you and I were the norm.
Yeah.
And there's so many, whether it was because of the conditioning or just because it didn't seem cool to feel.
Yeah.
Or it can be overwhelming. To go back to the first thing I said, we're animals that somehow want to avoid pain.
Yeah.
But it's just like the problem is the efforts to avoid emotional pain cause great amounts of emotional pain.
Yeah.
And other pain, like relational pain, addictive, like health problems. It's like there's no way. It's just so much easier once you realize, oh, it's like taking a poop. It's not a big deal. And once you clear out that backlog, once you catch up with yourself, it's just, and it's like, for me, I think the skill of knowing how to do it creates a sense of I can do anything. I can be who I really am. I can go big, take risks, fall in love, get my heart broken because I know how to shit it out. There, the first swear word was uttered.
The first swear word was uttered. Shit. I mean, and that's the name of your book. It's Feel, Heal, Feel, Heal, and Let That Sht Go. Your guide to emotional resilience and lasting self-love. And I love that. I mean, it's so... I think there's been such a focus on trauma and healing trauma, and we sort of have like taken this weird turn away from like refilling our crayon box of emotions to be coloring and expressing ourselves in the world. And it's so
true. Yeah. And I actually barely used the word trauma. Your conference that I attended, I went to the Embody Lab Somatic Trauma Healing Conference. It was fantastic. And it was very informative around the culture around trauma in this moment. And I was still editing. And so it enabled me to put in enough material so that anyone who was terrified or anyone who was really actually unsafe being with their feelings, which I think is almost no one, by the way, we can get into that later if you want. There's a lot of caution in the trauma healing field. But I don't even really, and I do use the word trauma in certain places, but I really like to talk about the thing we're doing as an emotional wound, which is, of course, what trauma means, but just to get away from the buzzwords and just to, because we kind of know what it's like when you have an injury or a wound.
Yeah.
People generally don't feel as ashamed about that. Whereas if they had a very traumatic childhood, they might feel ashamed of or if they're traumatized, PTSD, there's both hype and stigma, I think, around certain words, and I try to avoid them. And it's hard to be a human and not be gently used, as you point out in your title.
It is hard to be a human, and it is hard to feel our feels. And I think there's there's a value to that too. I mean, as you said, it's like, especially if we grew up with like caregivers or community that was shushing us or not supporting us. It's not just that the emotion didn't get to be moved, but there's kind of a wounding and
Yeah.
the abandonment of being
Yeah.
present with it.
Yeah, the abandonment first from those people around us, and then the self-abandonment.
Yeah.
Because and everyone does this, no one has to feel bad about it. But I think for me, the most illuminating point that I learned in grad school and that I've seen throughout, that's in my book, around why does everyone feel like they're not enough? Why is everyone literally walking through the world with some kind of, am I an imposter? Am I lovable? Am I good enough? I really see this as a pervasive problem. And so there's a very obvious thing to me around why. And it's like, when were those tiny little babies completely dependent? You know, we had two options basically of how to interpret any kind of neglect or emotional miss. And one was to feel like, I'm innocent. I'm just a little cute baby. And the people who are trying to take care of me are causing me pain, which boils down to me good, world unsafe.
Yeah.
The alternative, so feel that, anyone listening, like me, I'm innocent, but I'm dependent on an unsafe world, which is true also. Yeah. But the alternative was, I'm bad, but if I do better, if I act more like daddy wants me to act, or if I clean up my room, or if I get better grades, or if I act like the other kids, then maybe I'll get the love I need and I'll survive. And so that's just like a little more empowered. There's a diluted sense of agency and control, which makes little vulnerable sacks of cells feel better. And so all of us, it was the most adaptive thing to feel like it was our fault.
Yeah.
And because we were so sure that there was a life-threatening problem if these parts were expressed, all of us push them down and repress them in some way into what I like to call the emotional basement closet.
Mm-hmm.
And so we end up moving into phases of life like middle school or high school with like the most sensitive, unique, awesome, but like weird, awkward, parts of us tucked away, because no one's tucking away their, athletic capacity. No one's tucking away their intelligence, because they were probably getting praised for that. The parts that we push away are our sensitivity, the part of us that cries, the part of us that needs, the part of us that just said fart accidentally. And so, these are our compasses in a way. These are the ways we feel what's right for me. Mm-hmm. What gender do I actually feel lit up by? What form of intelligence do I actually have? And so by the time you're a teenager, a young adult, most people feel that's where the imposter shame and really like the deep wound that we are maintaining by caging these parts of ourselves. So just one thing about emotional potty training in my book is that before we can learn to re-grease the system, the emotional system, where we learn to get natural again and get regular and poop all those pains out, we have to find and court, remember, reintegrate the parts of us that are wounded. And that's the first step, and people call it parts work. Of course, IFS, internal family systems, if you haven't heard it, is having a huge moment, but parts work goes way back before IFS. It's in lots of the original schools of therapy, but for me, I really found it in Gestalt therapy, which was my foundation as a therapist. So we have to, before we can get light of emotional shit, we have to find the parts of us and build trust, rebuild trust, and pull them back in. And then once they really come back online, they're like, you were so mean to me. And the one last thing I want to say is that it's an important distinction, because I think as people start to do this healing work, it can be really easy to get stuck in thinking it was just your parents or your caregivers or or oppression or the external forces. And it's all of that. It's all of the world we're swimming in culturally, big and little scale culture. But it's usually, by the time you want to get in there, it's usually us.
Yeah. Yeah.
We do it to ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like those belief systems have replaced the presence of the emotions, and we're operating just on those. And then we're unfortunately, rewounding ourselves.
Yeah.
It's like someone breaks up with you, or you break up with someone, and it's like they didn't have the capacity to meet you. That's fine. That's human. But then we internalize it, and it it's that confirmation bias of like, I was too much. I was too, again, I am terrible. I am not enough.
Right.
And then as opposed to what's not being attuned to right now is there's a sadness here from a separation.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't even be with that emotion because the belief is in the operating chair or in the driver's seat. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so
and in those
hurtful.
moments, people running those records will probably be in some state of emotional suffering.
Yeah.
But I think it's often less acute. And one thing it's like the more acute emotions, meaning strong enough to actually come up and come out.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times when we're ruminating on our beliefs and our stories about how we suck, it can be like a low grade, almost behind the scenes, feeling bad, feeling despondent, but not, like you said, with the grief that would be actually like this life-giving, spring from our heart where water drips out of our face and then we feel better. Yeah. And one more piece about your example is it's very hard to be met by another when we're still hiding from ourselves. So for someone who hasn't been willing to, be with their own feelings, whether it's because they're not really in the relationship or they're handing all their feelings to the partner to say, hey, I don't know how to be with this. Can you be with this? And so I also think there's something for me, part of emotional potty training is learning how do we really get responsible for our feelings so we're not throwing them on others. Like most of us take poops alone. Now, I know some of you moms, new moms, you're like, yeah, right. Maybe some people need help pooping. I'm not saying everyone, but for the most healthy adults, it's a private activity. And not to shame emotions and say you can't have feelings with friends or you can't have feelings in community. That's really beautiful. But we also want to have the skill set to know how do we connect deeply enough to ourselves where we could have emotional movement, especially when it's about someone else, get it out in full blast, and then kind of come back to our resourced thinking and feeling self to figure out what to do in the relationship. And I think so much of what happens relationally is people don't have the tools to do that for themselves. So if someone loves them, they're like, hey, here's my feelings. Can you sort that through? And no, that's a therapist's job. And honestly, I don't even as a therapist, I'm teaching people, how do you do that for yourself? Or else you're going to become dependent on me.
Yeah. And so how do people know? Like if people who are listening and they're like, do I need emotional potty training? Like,
yes.
What are the signs? What are the things we might recognize that's saying like, I don't have my full spectrum expression capacity and ability to be with my emotions?
Yeah, well, I'll get to that piece. The one other thing I want to say is that part of the sign is you don't know, like emotional potty training is ultimately about healing yourself. Like emotional resilience and self-love. The outcome I'm saying is possible for the reader or someone going through this journey. It's really about it's not just about having your emotions and your emotional pain. It's about being who you really are. And it's like about being whole. So signs that you're not in that state would be pervasive self-doubt, regular feelings of fear or anxiety. It's more often called around, are you doing it right? Are you good enough? Do people like you? Do you belong? So those would all be, or pervasive, like depression. In the way I think of depression is it's a fog or a funk. It's a disconnection from your aliveness. Someone who's in a lot of grief or a lot of pain, they're going to feel like shit, but very alive. It's like, it's not a numbness. And so if you have pervasive numbness, or you're spending all of your time smoking, drinking, on cannabis, like if you're doing anything where you feel like you don't have control, and it might be shopping. See these nice earrings? It's like my drug of choice is pretty objects. Like some people's drug of choice is being really fit or being a really great mom, And so if there's anything that's running your life in a way where you don't feel like you have control, or you have a lot of relational conflict, like all of these signs are signs that your system's out of balance.
Yeah.
And as far as the emotional piece goes, I'd say that most people are going to fall on the numbness side of the spectrum. Occasionally, there are people who feel pervasively flooded with emotion, but there's never relief. And so, in general, like if you think about your digestion, and I'm telling you, this metaphor, it's endlessly accurate.
You love the defecation metaphor. I'm here for it.
I do. And I will tell you, the old ladies, bless their souls, of the publishing industry, because they're mostly lovely old ladies, they're like, honey, we don't talk about poop. And I wanted the book to be called Emotional Potty Training for Grown-Ups, and that was like flat out hard no. We ended up weaving in a little of the spice and using the word shit at the end. It was going to be also how to feel your feelings. Because guess what? There's not a book called How to Feel Your Feelings.
Oh.
But then with the problem with emotional potty training is, are men going to read this, no offense, on the subway in New York City? It's infantilizing, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the humor, and that loses people. And how to feel your feelings, everyone's trying not to, so that loses people. But we kind of like letting shit go, so we were like, okay.
I love the marketing conversation behind the curtain here of like, how do you fucking title a book that like is the same material, is targeted towards making something accessible and available for people to dive into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I've realized I'm kind of a marketing disaster, but it is what it is. Like, my podcast is the Healing Feeling Sht Show. And at some point I'm like, wait a second, I am selling people their pain through the metaphor of their poop. Like, someone should have gotten to me earlier brand wise, but I think it's like, I myself, like, I've done this work, and the bridge of shame, that this is something that people have a little bit of shame about. And I would say that they have more shame about the part of them that feels like shit, and just like the one last thing I wanted to say about the metaphor is, if you have to shit twice in a day or 3 times in a day, like, people aren't like, so weak, what's wrong with me? You're like, I feel really light. I'm just going to deal with it. And yet there's this way that when it comes to having to have a feeling, we judge ourselves in all these ways. We dig in it. We want to ask why. That is one of, just quick tip for the listener, the least effective thing you can do when you feel a feeling coming on in the moment and you want it to come out and not just like brew and get stuck, is to ask, why am I feeling this way? Because it immediately brings us into our heads where we try to control it. And if you look at the way we talk to each other, we only ask why when there's a subtle should, that we shouldn't be a certain way. Like, if I said, I'm going to work all day, Scott, you wouldn't be like, why? You'd be like, get it, girl, Yeah, you are. But if I was like, I'm really angry with my father, you might be like, why? Because we assume we shouldn't be that way. And so there's this shoulding on yourself, this like intellectualizing, which is most people's attempt to not feel. And it just brings you out of the sensations. And remember, emotions are sensations. Yeah. Now, this doesn't mean that you never sit back and reflect on why you feel terrified every time you have a crush. That's an important question, but not in the moment where you want to connect to the terror and flush it out or move it through, because that will just take you out of yourself. So it's like, we have to be really strategic with thinking, because thinking shuts down feeling. Yeah. And you know what? There are so many people where their entire therapeutic healing journey has just been thinking and just been coming up with fantastic understanding of why they are how they are. And they're still full of the dysfunctional patterns. Yeah. Oh, and I know you guys aren't big like CBT or thought approach people. The body people know that if the body's not included, what are you doing? Like, it's not going to work. I know you know that. That's you've created an empire around that. Thank you. But, it's just like really important to realize, even in the face of trying to understand yourself, you have to be careful when you're thinking. Yeah. And the quickest way through feeling is just coming down into it and giving permission, bringing your awareness into it. Of course I'm sad. Of course I'm mad. Yeah. Okay. What? Okay. Kind of like conjuring it. Yeah. I like to think also about like replacing why with how. Exactly. Like why am I sad? Let's try this again. Rewind. How am I experiencing this sadness? Exactly. And it's still a question that raises us above the level of feeling, but it's a step closer, because then the next invitation is to explore, how am I experiencing this? Yeah, to study the phenomenology of it. Yeah, no, that's in my book. I agree. And that's in, I had a video. I know what it is. Oh, you did? Yeah, girl, I know your book. Did you actually read it? I read it. You had time? That's amazing. Yeah. Yeah, well, I agree with you on that then. You know that. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a beautiful question. And it's pretty close to the body. How do I, it gives you into like the studying of what's actually happening.
I want to take a moment to give a loud shout out to the Embody Lab, which is one of the most incredible resources for body-based and somatic therapies. This show is all about healing, and the Embody Lab does exactly that. Whether you're on your own journey of transformation and discovery, or enhancing your skill sets in your career as like a coach or a therapist, a body worker, or really any career where you are supporting other gently used humans, the Embody Lab is your place for deep, inspiring, and impactful workshops, certificates, masterclasses, and an incredible community of like-minded folks. I love the Embody Lab, and so do so many other people that call it a platform to come home to over and over again. The Embody Lab is giving my listeners an exclusive offer, a one-time 10% off code to enhance your embodied well-being. All you have to do is go to theembodylab.com and use the code GentlyUse10 at checkout. I think about it as like an elevator system, as you know, as you describe. And it's like, there's the why that's on the top floor. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I love a top floor situation because the feelings are too much. And even me, like, I'm like, ooh, that's too much for me tonight. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to ride the elevator up to intellectualization. Yeah. And then the next day, maybe.
Or even to Netflix.
Netflix and intellectualization. And then like take the elevator right down to like, how am I feeling this? Which is still like, again, it's a question that's an invitation. It's a question that goes, I'm still looking at it. Mm-hmm. And then once I go, I'm feeling that like in my stomach. Okay, I'm still looking at it. I'm aware of it. I'm still witness to it, but I'm that much closer to the ground floor. And then I take the elevator right down to the ground floor, and it's like I feel the feel as you talk about.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And
can I be with what's in my stomach and just let it be there?
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, that's why it's a question. Can I?
It's a good question.
And there is a moment, there are moments where it's not appropriate to do this, and for me, one of the places I put thinking into my modality or emotional potty training is after a feeling. Yeah. And I call it reality testing. And it's all about coming up with, it's all about like, you've gotten the majority, you've gotten all out. That's as much as you can get out in that session, whether it's because you have to pick your kid up or you ran out of time or you went numb, it's like the end.
Yeah.
And then you would question the feeling. And I'll speak to, if you want, the juiciest nugget I could give your audience is about.
I want the juicy nugget now.
Okay.
When you're
now. Okay. I'm going to back up then. Okay. So the basement of the feeling.
The feeling, the feels floor. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's say once you're like, all right, I see it. It's in my stomach.
Yeah.
The next step might be, depending on your approach toward that part. Like for people who are really harsh toward yourself, you're like, damn it, I'm feeling this again. You want to judge it. You might want a step where you're like, well, what if this were little me? What if this was baby Scotty? Or if you don't feel that compassion yet toward your younger self, might be like, what if this was your pet? Or what if this was your niece who you love and you would do anything for? So there's something called, it's conversing is the step. And that's where you might be like, what do you need? As if it's another being, which you don't need to do. Like that's a little bit of like mind work. If you're in it, you don't do that. Yeah. But the most crucial, slightly controversial step that I think actually is the difference between people who are hobbling around compensating with very beautiful stories about why and how they are, but still deep down feeling like they're a worthless sack. Yeah. The difference between that and someone who's like, I know I'm valuable and well, and I feel balanced and resourced mostly, doesn't mean I won't ever get hit with like insecurity or hard feelings, but I'm like, I'm here, I'm me, I like me, that kind of like emotional resilience and lasting self-love. The difference is that the final step is that despite what mindfulness and meditation, and I have deep roots in those worlds, tells us that, observe your thoughts. You're not your thoughts. They're clouds. Or, you're not your feelings. And it's true. Ultimately, we're no more our feelings than we are our poops. They are transitory, temporary things that move through us. Okay. So those ultimately are true, that we aren't those things. But when we were little, those well-intentioned parents kept saying there's nothing to be afraid of. And the experience, even if you got it from your therapist is probably, because you're so harsh on yourself, and this is just you generally for anyone who's harsh on themselves, they're doing a lot of reframing. Oh, honey, it wasn't your fault. Your parents couldn't meet you. Like, that was your most adaptive strategy. Again, true. I said that, right? Like, that is true.
Yeah.
But that's another way of talking ourselves out of the experience. And those parts were so dismissed and talked out of their experience that they don't feel allowed to be as they are, and which means they don't feel allowed to be with us as we are. And therefore, the only way to have that emotional dump be effective is that you have to actually realize it is you.
Yeah.
And that part of you is absolutely positive at a bone deep level that what it fears is true about you is the truth. And that's why people who have like sparkling lives, like peak of success, people look at them like, oh my God, you're killing it. You're crushing it. You're, slay, whatever. That's why those people, even at 98% thriving, are going to feel like they're full of it, because those parts are the most powerful parts of us. And they are positive that their fears of us not being good enough, being wrong somehow, are true. And so the only way to actually let it out is to become the part and have the pity party feeling session from the place of this is true. Yeah. And like to actually be like, yeah, nobody loves me. And like nobody wants to do that because it wasn't actually true. And you're afraid that if you let it be true, you'll never get out of it. But here's the catch. If you don't do that, it's like getting cut on a trail and having your cut be full of dirt, but stitching up your cut without washing it out. Like it's gonna fester. And so if we let it out by being like feeling and being in the part, as long as you can sustain it, most people can't for more than a couple minutes, really, despite your fear that you'll never get out of it. Pay you $10 if you're not in acute loss and you can stay with it. Just joking, but let me know. Email me. But so that's the step that I think is really the most crucial. And I think actually like part of what I'm going to start touring around in the therapeutic and healing and even manifest or mindset world, because everyone's afraid to like actually identify with that. And spiritually, we're taught not to. So there's all these systems saying, hey, keep a little distance. And I'm saying you can't actually let it out if you keep the distance. How you need to learn, how do you turn toward it, move toward it, become it, release from it, and then crawl back out. And that's when we get to reality testing. But I will pause because I'm sure you want to talk to me. I've been speaking. We will come back to the reality testing though.
I appreciate what you're saying so much. And it's so culturally counterintuitive. And it's like someone says to you, I feel so ugly. I think I said that to my therapist the other day. I'm like, I just feel so ugly and like so fake and all this stuff. And she said, that part of you is welcome here. Yeah. And I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
What the most beautiful thing to offer, as opposed to, that's not true, Scott.
Yeah.
Or where do you think that came from?
Right. Yeah. Because then you feel ugly and maybe it melts a little bit. Or softens
and I'm like, oh wait, I think that belief is welcome here, because is that really the core wound? Probably not. But like, I can't get to the core wound. I'm excited to talk to you about how to get to core wounds, as in your book. Like, we can't even possibly get to that until like that belief that formed as a form of protection is acknowledged and accepted here.
And welcomed.
And then
and if there's pain to release, that's how it'll release.
That's how it will release. Yeah. That is how it will release.
Yeah, so, you have a good therapist. Not everybody does.
No.
All therapy is not made equally.
No, it's true. It's really interesting how a lot of therapists reproduce the abandonment wound by saying, that's not true. That's right. Or like, how can we change that belief? before we accept it, because a lot of the emotional wound is the lack of acceptance.
Right. Well, can you imagine on your first or second session if you were like, I feel ugly, and she's like, oh, you are, like, which obviously
Yeah,
isn't what
that
she
wouldn't
said.
work.
Like, there needs to be a little bit of, there's a scaffolding that
Yes,
happens,
of course.
and people need to both understand, like, yeah, these are wounds and they have beliefs and that aren't true and feel true. And part of how we got here, actually, as I was saying, it's not always the appropriate moment. It's not always the time. And so we do want to learn how to kind of snap out of or give those like quick, mantras or affirmations or interventions, or just know how more effectively to come back to the present.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not time to wonder if I'm ugly or not. I'm talking to this other human.
Yeah.
And if I think about if I'm ugly or how I look, I'm going to get distracted, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to be here. If I go and it's not time to be like, yeah, nobody loves me. Like,
Yeah.
And so we have to know, when is it time to poo? When is it not time to poo? And then so just one more piece, and then we can talk about core wounds. And it's fun. I like how we're kind of like doing it in a non-linear way. It's fun. But at the end of a feeling session, let's say you were skilled enough to be able to be with the part that felt ugly, or be with the part that's positive. No one will ever be with it or love it. It's doomed to be alone. And you cried, or you shook, or you hit your bed, or you whatever it was, whatever amount of actually emoting, and having the energy move that you were able to do. At the end of that, you want to say, you want to come out a little bit and say, was it really true that my mom hated me? Or was it really true that me being sensitive, maybe especially as a man, because that's more conditioned out of men, like makes me unlovable? And what I want to caution people about is a lot of like that mindset, manifest, spiritual community is going to have you do those candy-coated, sugary, saccharine affirmations, which is like, I'm beautiful and my sensitivity makes me amazing. And the deal with that is that there's no way your wounded parts will believe it. And therefore it has no impact.
Yeah.
It just feels like you're lying to yourself. And so my version of reality testing is, what is the most grounded belief, the most basic, gentle step that even the most ugly, wounded, unlovable feeling parts of you can believe? And so it might be something less like, instead of saying my mom was a perfect mom, or my mom loved me completely, or my sensitivity makes me amazing, it's like, my mom was really wounded and wasn't able to show up for me the way I needed, and it really made me feel unlovable. Or it's really a shame that my family wasn't able to support my sensitivity, and so now I feel so bad about it. Where it's a touch out of that story that the core wound has of being utterly unlovable or being a disaster because you're sensitive, but it's not going to something that actually won't make a difference. And so then we lay the foundation of being able to come to a place where you're like, my sensitivity is my superpower, from the ground up versus from this like hollow ceiling down. And then the last question to ask after you do that reality testing and you sit with the feeling of the kind of reality tested belief is, what do I need? Given how sad I am today, given how scared I am, and you want to try to take care of yourself. And it might be a bath or a walk or calling a friend or a cup of ice cream versus the whole pint. If not that there's anything wrong with eating a pint, but like, if you didn't feel it, you might have eaten the pint instead of feeling it. Hopefully after feeling it, you might still want a little treat. Little you might be like, could I have a lollipop? I did the hard thing. I went to the dentist. But you're trying to take care of yourself so you don't make yourself sick. So it's just those steps kind of make it possible to get back into life. And for the people who are afraid that if you go into your pain and especially become it, that one step I was just talking about, you won't come out of it. Those are some of the steps that help you come out of it. And as you start to feel comfortable going into choosing to turn toward, move toward, become, release your pain and come out of it and feel better, feel lighter, feel more relaxed because now you're in your body and there's nothing to hide from. It's really self-motivating. It's like at first the hard work is getting people to try this.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to. But once you get a taste of, actually, there's so much less pain when I just have a little pain. And then I get to be proud of myself for feeling the worst thing about me. I get to be like, look at me go. My clients come in, they're like, I had a rage session, or like, I cried about being disgusting for a half an hour, and they're so happy because that's the goal. It flips the whole thing on its head.
I love that.
Yeah.
And you're describing such a sticky, tricky situation and a lot of the healing culture that I think you articulated so well.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's yes, cheers to you and your little one. That like it's really hard because I think there's a whole genre of like you put this Post-it note on your mirror that says you are lovable.
Mm-hmm.
And you do it and you repeat it every day and you repeat it every day and you repeat it every day. And it's like there is a physiological response. It's not nothing. And I want to honor that.
Yeah.
There's a vibratory tone that you are inducing into your system. And that doesn't mean the exiled parts of yourself can receive that vibration.
Yeah. No. They can.
And they are still existing in a different time, in a different space, and in a different messaging that is counter to that.
Yeah.
And it's like,
and without you, they're
and
alone.
without you, and they
you're
are
just
still
too busy
alone.
trying to be lovable.
Yes, and they're still fucking alone.
Yeah. Yeah, I was on an podcast interview yesterday about manifesting of someone who was probably really in that world. And so she asked, well, what do you have to say to those people? And I think that practice of like the affirmation over the untouched wound is like putting a scratch and sniff sticker over a pile of poo. Like until you get in there and heal the wound, the main thing you're emanating is that you feel like a piece of shit. Yeah. It still smells like shit. And, whereas if you go in, like being lovable, guess what the best way to show yourself you're lovable is? It's loving even the part of you that feels unlovable. When you start to, and I have a whole few chapters on how do you court those parts back, my version of like the parts work reintegration. Yeah. When you start to like check in on them, when you start to say, hey, I'm sorry I've been ignoring you. When you start to ask them, how do they actually feel about your friends and your schedule and your pace? They start to feel cared for. And when you start to give them permission to be with you in their pain, like there's a beautiful Gestalt sentiment that is contact is curative. And like whatever, like that's what we needed as children. We needed contact wherever we were. We needed people to be willing to be with us, and we need it as adults, like that presence, and we need it with ourselves. Whatever we can make contact with, whatever we can be present with, whatever we bring our attention to flourishes. And so as you give these parts permission, as you bring your wounded parts onto your lap and you say, tell me, honey, tell me how you suck. Yeah. You're, whatever it is. And you don't have to talk like that to your parts. You could, it's fine. Whatever you think, whatever you feel. But that's what actually makes them feel lovable. And that's how these parts get woven back into us. It's by being welcomed in to say, I am hurting so badly. You've locked me up down here. You've been hiding me. You're trying to pretend like I don't exist on these dates. And I feel so bad. I feel like the scapegoat, and when that starts to shift, that's when those parts feel lovable. And that's when that affirmation sticky note resonates to more of you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for just giving us some really clear tools, because it is so hard. And those who are listening, it is fucking hard.
Yeah,
and
it's hard.
The little parts of us that are just like fucking wounded and we're strolling along in life, kind of dragging them along and haven't yet like walk side by side with them.
Yeah.
And reintegrate them.
In the little pack. Yeah. Like, yeah. And I do think like, just like most people's caregivers were trying their hardest.
Yeah.
And most of these systems, most therapists who might say you're not ugly, most, certainly the CBT people, the mindset, the manifestation people, everyone's just trying to help. And for me, part of why I'm doing this, and I appreciate that this wasn't your first question for me, but can I say a little bit why I'm doing this?
Yeah, of course. That was on the list, but let's do it.
Well, does it mess with your plan if I say it now?
No, I have no plan except to just be present with you.
Perfect. Well, for me, I had all the normal, core wounds that you get from just having human parents, of
Yeah.
course, for sure. But my real healing journey started in my first love relationship. My 14-year-old boyfriend took his life, and it was a very convoluted experience. A little version of it's in the book, a bigger version's in my podcast if you want to cry and know me as a 14-year-old brat who got annihilated. But so for me, this has been like a 25-year quest to find relief. And what's interesting is, I went to Eastern spiritualities, and, I started healing around 18 and thought I was way further than I was, of course, thought I was about to be enlightened. I mean, I was so deluded, but it took a while to realize I was actually really grappling with this wound of worthlessness, doomed to be left, for about 25 years. And 10 of those years, I was a very skillful psychotherapist.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I finally realized about 8 years ago, oh my God, I love myself. Like I have no resistance to this woman, that I was seeing. I made a little video in Joshua Tree Desert for my husband. I had just left a marriage, which was totally like this whole karmic thing around the healing of this childhood loss. I, without any effort, ended up leaving on the 22 anniversary of my first love's death. Crazy. But anyway, I was burying a piece of a mezuzah, which is this like pottery, or for this, it was pottery that we had on a door, and it had broken because we would have bad fights. We would slam doors. And I was burying this last piece. We were about a year out of being no longer together. And in this year is when I really realized who I was at this point. And I was burying this piece, and I made this little video just being like, I'm burying this. And I just watched the video, and this was before I was making videos of myself. And I just felt so open, and I wasn't done up. I didn't look cute. There was nothing like performative. I just realized on that mountaintop, and I now have a house there probably because it was like this spiritual anchor of self-love for me, that I loved myself. And so for me, the fact that I had been studying healing modalities since I was a teenager, and I was a, seemingly thriving, sparkly, good life looking, like everything was fine, but felt that. And I perceive that I think most people and the therapeutic healing industry as it stands are getting people to like 60, 75%, where they're hobbling around compensating. They know how to resource, maybe sometimes they feel mostly okay. But I think that most people's baseline is still in that like shitter. And so for me, since then, the last 8 years have just been like, how can I share the unique and absolutely necessary pieces that made the difference for me between that hobbling and that baseline, and really make it clear and put it in lay terms with humor and, and as much clarity as possible so that other people don't take 3 decades.
Yeah.
And I do think that like, it's a little bit of a, speaking out to problems we're facing in the field. I have an episode in my podcast where I shit all over the therapeutic industry, and I'm like, guys, we're phoning it in, B-. But my book editor was like, Rachel, you can't come in. She's like, we don't talk poop, and you can't come in fighting with the therapeutic industry because you need these people to refer your book. So I was like, okay, fine. But, I think like once the book's out and in the conversations, not that it's about shaming, because again, like you said, it's hard. Yeah. And if for someone, a healer, and healer, maybe that word means you had to heal yourself. Yeah. But there are a lot of people who are professional healing professionals who didn't or haven't and don't actually know how to be with their own pain, let alone yours. So if someone didn't really have to go on their journey and didn't really transmute that, they may or may not know how to help you all the way. Yeah. Even if they have all the trainings and they're cutting edge, all the things. Yeah. And so everyone's doing their best. It's not about being harsh, but I just think like things are so critical at this point, in all the ways, environmentally, politically, people are suffering. And like, if there's a way to try to say, I was so lucky to get this help. And the main person who really helped me break through was not a therapist. He lives in a mud hut. I don't use his name. Anyway, I got a lot of very unique help that I'm deeply grateful for. And I never wanted kids. I'm just like, use my weird life and my big ass mouth to like help. And that's what I'm doing.
And we're so grateful for it.
Thank you.
What? Like, can we just give what is the 35%? What is like, okay, most therapy gets difference? The 60, 70%. What's the 30% that gets us from the sort of stuttering in life
Yeah.
to the
Mhm.
healing where it feels
Yeah.
that sense of flow?
Yeah, we've luckily already addressed some of the pieces. I mean, you have to have two pieces really in place. These are the
Okay.
two wings of EPT, emotional potty training. You have to have the parts of you that you had to or chose to cast out of you back online. They have to be, and it doesn't maybe, like you could feel pretty good without having everybody like perfectly woven together. It could still be like a weird little like galley or like, meeting of ghouls, like, but you have to have them back out of the closet, most of them. And that might be a lifelong journey, but it's like if you are walking around still trying to deny certain aspects of yourself, whether it's your sensitivity or your quirkiness or your queerness or your whatever it is, it's going to be harder for you to like yourself, because you're not going to be yourself, and you're going to know that even if you don't know what's missing. So part of it is like you really have to have that work done, and it's not just about having an idea about it. And I've actually like kind of in the last few years since I've been working on my book, I've been almost intentionally avoiding reading like No Bad Parts or like, because everyone thinks my work is IFS. And I'm like, well, IFS I do have a very basic understanding of it. It seems to have a beautiful model for this. I don't know if they are focusing as much on the like release component. I think there is some understanding that once you can be with the exile part from the place of self, that there will be a release, but I don't know that there's as much training or technique around the release. So parts work, integrating parts, absolutely necessary. But the other piece is really like, once those parts come back, you have to actually, release their pain one movement at a time. And, basically one of the ways to understand this, and this came from the nameless mentor, is that if you picture like any of our feelings could be understood as being on like a number line.
Yeah.
And like, I'll give you an example. Like if we look at anger, like -10 of anger might be rage. +10 of anger might be like zealous passion, you know? And most people, when they're stuck in the gutter of the -10s, whether it's like terrified, worthless, despair, rage. So, those are the four basic emotions, the primary colors of emotions, of course, happy also. But, what they're going to try to do is swing to the positive side to get away from it. So constant busyness, constant addiction. For me, lots of concerts, lots of new clothes, like whatever your thing is, you're going to swing to the other side. But the other side, it's like, it's not sustainable. So you swing back. And so most people are operating, part of the 65% is like whatever part of you still feels like a -8 or -10, ultimately your overall baseline is probably compensating. And then that is making it worse. And you're going to just swing back and forth. And so there's like two tracks of emotional release work, and there's two types of emotional release work. There's like learning how to feel your feelings when they happen.
Yeah.
You're moving through your day. Someone says something mean, you feel sad. It's not the place you feel sad, but 10 minutes later, you go into the bathroom at work and you have a little cry and you do your reality testing. You come back, you go back to work. That would be the surface way. And it's really skillful. And ultimately, once people are done with their healing, and I don't mean like forever, you're going to keep feeling, you're going to keep healing. But when you feel like you're yourself and you have like a pretty solid baseline, that's the main thing you're doing. There will be phases of life where you're not trying to dig up your old pain. That's important for people to know. The point isn't to be emo AF all the time. Okay. The point is to like clear out the backlog and then be able to digest whatever pain you need to in your life when it comes up, right? Be able to, so you can live your life. So that top layer is like daily recovery. The deeper layer, which is really what you're asking, like, how do you get to like closer to hundo P, is how do you move that deeply established negative emotional baseline from the gutter to, and this is going to be disappointing for some of you, the midline. Like, we're not going for a high. There will be highs. And for most people, actually, and there's a chapter on this, highs are tricky. Like if you're in a new relationship, you're suddenly like shitting the bed, you're suddenly can't sleep because you're scared, when's it going to end? There's a lot to lose, as Brene Brown points out, with joy. And for, even you get a job promotion, or even this, like I'm in this big moment of career, this like, offering my gifts to the world. It is absolutely an answer to my prayers and the purpose of my life. And yet the stress that comes from it is pushing on me harder. I am crying more. I am having more like work to just make sure my baseline stays level, because even the highs have hard feelings to them.
Yeah.
Even you achieving, I'm married and I bought a house and I have 2.5 kids, is going to have hard stuff, right? There's no escape from hard feelings.
Yeah.
So what we're looking for is a resilient, robust, juicy, neutral, which is like, to go back to the anger line, which I gave an example of, instead of rage or trying to convince everything of your passion, you have the capacity. The midpoint would be care. My heart is online. I care about things and therefore I have boundaries. Therefore I have motivation. I have mojo. The midpoint of the terror versus invincibility would be I feel safe. The midpoint of worthlessness and being better than or arrogance is I am enough. And the midpoint of despair to bliss is I am content. So these like moving toward, and I would say someone's at like 90% if you're like, maybe your baseline, your resting place is like -1, but you go between -1 and +2 or 3. You have your fluctuations because you're a human, gently used, but you're not swinging like crazy. And then so the piece around the second wing, so we have the parts integration, need to have that. And then the emotional release work. And really the crux of that is learning the tools and the skills, because it's not easy once you've been ignoring your feelings for as long as we have, to skillfully bring your awareness and your attention into the parts that are in pain, release the pain from the point of view of truth, the becoming step I already spoke about, and then recover. That is the difference. And if someone is trying to do all of this, except actually letting the part of you that feels like a worthless piece feel like that, you still will be a little bit like, am I full of it? And you are. And it's okay. No problem. We're all in this together.
This show is also brought to you by the absolutely stunning and powerful tools of transformation that are created by Omala. Oof, even the name Omala transports you to a place of flow and vitality. These are some of my favorite products ever. They have an amazing color-changing yoga mat that responds to your temperature and presence and reflects back your posture in real time. There's this incredible smelling skin balm candle that heats up to activate all the essential oils and vitamins that your skin has been craving. I mean, look, if I could live in a giant bath of this candle, I would 100% do it. They also have these journals that lead you into profound insight, and then you get to plant those journals to create a stunning flower garden. What? I mean, if that's not deep and inventive, I don't know what is. If you're someone who desires to live a luxurious flow of life and who believes in transformative wellness, then you have to check out Omala. Omala is giving my listeners an exclusive discount to treat yourself to something that is as special as you, boo. All you have to do is go to omala.com, that's OMALA.com, and use the code DrScott10 at checkout. And a portion of every purchase goes to an incredible charity. You got this. I want to get into offering even more some practical practices. You have so many in your book. You have so many tools. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for thinking that. I'm like, good. I have enough tools. Great.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's it takes a fair amount of work just to unpack the complexity of this. And you do a great job of that. And then to offer what the fuck do we do now? Yeah. And so I want to go into what is one of your favorite techniques for emotional release?
Yeah. Well, to speak to that, the first tip I'll give your listeners, and this is a little more about understanding, but it's crucial for the action part, is, emotions are energetic and there are pretty simple ways they move. Emotions are basically some combination. They're either an explosive center to outward energetic, like anger, like the frenetic component of fear, flight or fight. It's like your energy goes to your limbs. You might feel hot. You might want to explode. You might get tense. And that could be as simple as someone swerves into your lane and suddenly your arms swell up. It's this is a physical thing. Okay. So it's there's, explode, And then the other half is implode. So sadness is really about slowing down. It's about, allowing this heaviness to come, and like something comes out of our eyes if we're lucky, and our hearts ache. And so understanding those basics, and there is a implosive version of fear, which, paralysis, freeze. And I think shame, when you're feeling just like, I suck, it's kind of it's a grief, like heavy implosive thing. There's a version though, when you get to the like final step of overcoming shame, you got to fight the fuck back. I hope it's okay I said that.
Yeah.
And you can bleep it. And so you sometimes bring like, that more explosive. So part of it is just, when you start to practice this, you want to be like, can I be with an explosive and implosive energy? Now, this is something you actually want to set up with reactive emotional release work. Like I said in my example, you're just feeling what happens to you, but you're already triggered, so it's easier. To do the deep dive work, it's about setting up proactive emotional release sessions where you actually build it into your schedule, regardless of the kind of day you're having. Like you don't wait till you're all bent out of shape, because then that's reactive, which good for you, have your feelings. But if you have a six pack, if you have like a lot of followers, if you have a healthy bank account, you're working on it. And similarly, like you need to establish times where you can put your phone away, where you can slow down, where you can turn toward yourself and not be worried about your kids or your partner or your job. And so I'd say in the beginning, it's like starting with a few of these kind of times per week where you're willing to set up a session with yourself. And then the $1 million question, and I give a lot of very specific tips on how do you actually get your awareness in there, kind of like mindfulness embodiment tips. But like you're essentially asking, how am I? How do I feel? And, going into a healing session, if you feel really moody, you're yelling at drivers, you're flicking people off, you want to, strangle your kids, like that would give you a clue. I think I need an anger session. Right? Something happens that you resisted the urge to yell at someone, congratulations, because this is never about emoting or throwing emo poo balls at anyone. You resisted that. As soon as possible, you want to get to a place where you're going to set up that session. And so you might have a pretty strong idea of what you need. You might, hopefully as you do the work. But then, it's like you're trying to create these ideal conditions to have that tuning in, and then that physicalized in some way explosion or implosion. So I'll give you a tip on both sides.
Yeah.
For anger, it's cool. You can do it in the middle of a busy day because you're already like, you can be caffeinated, and you want to make sure you don't hurt yourself. So it's helpful to stretch, and then depending on your mobility and your physical capacity, the easiest classic, you could wring out a pillow, you could scream into a pillow. I suggest gentle pressure on your Adam's apple or whatever. Is this called that for ladies? Anyway, this part, so you don't blow out your vocal cords. Let's call it that.
Not gentle pressure, like pressing your hand there, like just gentle.
Well, actually, no, like you might want to hold your fingers lightly there. So you're not trying to, you want to scream if you're going to scream from your belly.
Yeah.
Not choking yourself during, unless that's your thing. So, but like people who are less mobile might do something where you're sitting and, squeezing a pillow, emoting, venting. My favorite way, what my mentor got me doing, and I've taken dozens of clients into the woods to do this. It is a little bit illegal and dangerous, so I'm not saying you do this, but is chopping wood with an axe, dead wood. You're not like killing a tree. And luckily, everybody could do simulated chopping, which is taking a blanket or a towel. You could wet the towel if it's not heavy enough, and beating the shit out of your bed or your couch. And so, those are some examples. Every chapter, there's going to be like 5 or 6 chapters just on how do you feel the feelings? How do you recover? What are those steps of like I said, turning toward, allowing, conversing, becoming, and then reality testing, self-care. I like bring you through the ins and outs. But then each chapter, there's an anger, sadness, fear, shame chapter. So those are the anger skills. Those would also be really good skills for frenetic fear. You're terrified, you're anxious, you're stressed. By the way, guys, let's not call it anxious and stressed. Let's say I'm scared.
Yeah.
It gets you closer to your body.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. When we over label, we under contact the emotion.
Exactly. That's brilliant. Yeah. So if you're afraid and it's frenetic, put on weird music, do weird erratic thrashing, punch, kick, and scream. Like you can kind of work those frenetic energetics in together. And then for sadness or anything that needs to release ideally through tears, which is almost every feeling except anger. And that's a whole thing there. Like some people do cry when they're angry. I think often people conditioned as women are, because they're anyone not giving themselves permission to be angry might cry. But tears are a beautiful release for most of the feelings.
Yeah.
For some of you might be like, well, I haven't cried in a decade. What the hell do I do? And sometimes people burp. Sometimes people retch like they're gonna like vomit. Some people yawn. Like you want to look for how is your body moving the feelings. You might poop a lot, actually, literally. But for sadness, for the downward energetics where maybe you'd cry, it's usually about creating containment. So the same way we would see a child that is moved to cry wanting to be held, you need to create a contained experience of being held, whether that's like getting under a weighted blanket or all of your blankets if you don't have a weighted blanket, and playing a sad song, and trying to put your hands on your chest and give yourself permission. It's okay. I'm here. Of course, I'm sad. Another amazing way, and it meets the elemental. We haven't talked about this, but I do correlate, and this is from my nameless mentor also, the emotions with the elements. And it's a beautiful way to understand what they look like in balance. But what element correlates with sadness, what element comes out of our faces, we can be bogged down, the swamp of heartbreak, like we're flooded, we're drowning. It's water, right? And so if you have a bathtub, congratulations, pimp out your bathtub, get your music, salt, candles. You may have to interface with your feelings about your body. If that's too distracting, although that could be a doorway into your sadness or shame, if you have sadness and shame about your body, if it's too distracting, put on a t-shirt, like, so you can go to the feelings and not just like figure out if you like your body or not. But I'm just warning people that can come up, body feelings. But get into the bathtub, feel the containment of this like element, this living, life-giving, element holding you, and try to take in the care of the water and bring in the care toward the part of you that is sad or paralyzed in fear or swamped with shame, and give yourself permission. And the last thing I want to say about all of this is that once people are like, all right, I'll have my feelings, like I'm going to do it, I'm going to poop it out, it's really easy to get alpha and aggro with your parts. And these are parts that have gotten beat up. You have shamed them. You have shunned them. You have exiled them. Society may have exiled them. When you start bringing them back in, you don't want to be aggressive with them. And just like it would hurt you if you squeezed out too hard a poop, it will hurt you if you kind of exploit these parts of you. And so the key word is care. This is all about giving permission for these parts to be as they are and caring. And like for most of us, really understanding, or at least for me, I can own for me, there was like a very stark moment in my journey where I was like, oh, this is what caring for myself actually feels like. It's soft. It's about like moving at a speed that part can tolerate. It's slow. And so particularly when you're working with the implosive emotions, you want to be soft. And the good news is, wherever you are, when you start trying this, you're going to feel like a failure. The good news is that you're going to be like, I can't even do this. It's going to touch on all the shame and worthlessness. And if you can just be like, oh, what is that like in my body? Here, I feel like a failure again. Okay. How does that feel inside? Here, it's like everything, it's not in the way. It is the way to the feelings. If you can like ride the pony in or ride the elevator down, as you said. But and there's going to be, a dozen examples with each of the feelings of little things to try. And a lot of them are very similar. A few things that are just good for all feelings. Nature. Feeling held, having a connection to a slow living system that is bigger than you. That is actually what is keeping us alive despite our lack of acknowledgement of it. Music. Make an angry playlist, make a sad playlist. Movement. Art, if you're not a perfectionist about it. Art, if you can use it to just like express the feels, These are all things that are what I call bandwidth enhancing. When we go to try to feel a 20-year-old, 30-year-old pain, it's like having a 30-year-old poop. And the example I give in my book is that, if you forgot to, I know we have like movies on planes now, but like, we didn't always. And so if you wanted to download your movie onto your iPad and you didn't do it before the airport, it doesn't matter. You could be in the airport for like a week and the signal is not strong enough to get that big file onto your device. And similarly, these old, big, deep, terrifying emotions are like huge files.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what you're looking to strategize, a lot of what I'm doing in my work and teaching people how to do for themselves is how do you enhance your bandwidth, your connection to yourself? How do you create a sense of being held and being strong enough connection where this big thing can happen? And that's why so often people turn to their loved ones when they're having feelings, because there's an immediate amplification of bandwidth. And that's good to know you have that when you need it, for sure. My first editor of my book was like, Rachel, seems like you hate friendships. I was like, I don't, but I think most of us are a little bit codependent with humans and it can bog people down. Like everyone's kind of dealing with their own stuff. And so when you know that you have tools to amplify your bandwidth on your own and you have all these ideas in your pockets of like how to create little feeling parties that you can be proud of yourself and feel better after, you'll turn to your friends when you need them, but you're not asking every person you know to come in the shitter with you.
It takes time. It takes support. It takes love. How would you describe having been through it yourself, having taken people through it and probably heard so many people go, I don't know. Like, I don't know about that emotion shit. I don't know about like having it. What is on the other side? What can you guarantee me on the other side, Rachel?
Well, I really feel this way. It's like that robust neutral, that steady baseline of I'm safe, I'm worthy, I'm enough. I mean, imagine feeling like you're enough. I care about my life. I'm content. I can spend a few minutes by myself without staring at my phone, maybe occasionally because I feel okay inside. I'm not running from myself. And then maybe the better part is like, I am myself and I'm no longer engaging in relationships that don't really see me, that don't meet me, that are just the perpetuation of these childhood dysfunctional patterns. I know how to like magnetize like the things that are actually a good fit for me because I'm being myself. And I know how to, I'm brave enough to actually go after the very beautiful and short life I get to live here. And so I also think that deep in like when people really start to heal and feel well, feel lovable, there's a real sense of having gifts to share, and like bringing your magic to the world. So not only will you feel better and have more fun, that's the other thing. One of my quotes, I have it on my water bottle, emotional resilience is the new happy. I know it's backwards, but it's like, if you do this healing work, here's the deal. You're going to be mostly happy. But what's better than being happy is knowing that you can handle whatever else you're also going to be, because life is going to life. You are going to lose your life. Everyone you love is going to die. We don't know the order that's going to happen, but there is grief coming with that. We know it's stressful. We know we're going to lose our keys. We're going to lose partners. We're going to feel silly. We're going to, it's like, and if you know that you can handle all those feelings, then you're going to feel like you can be in your life in a really emotionally resilient way. And the good news is when you have done this healing work, you're no longer hiding, taking yourself too seriously. All the little weird parts feel lovable. So you start really being this delightful weirdo, and it's just a lot of fun. It's like, and I think, what is the point? People are obsessed with healing.
Yeah.
What is the point if we don't also lean into enjoyment, and not the kind of like enjoyment where we're chasing the escape from our hell realms of the emotional gutters of our deeply wounded baselines, but the enjoyment of like, life's pretty funny and like, and it's pretty great that we get to like, see birds and dogs and make jokes and, poop and sleep and eat Thai food, like you get to enjoy your life. And I think you're meant to.
Yeah.
And also I just want to thank you, Scott, for like normalizing how hard it is. And I think that's really important. I do think I do a lot of that. I know we're on a time schedule, so I'm like robustly giving you the motivation and saying, this is how you do it. But it's like, it's really hard. And it took me 25 years. I'm trying to use my skills to make it quicker for others. I'd say almost everyone is in this journey together, and there's no reason to feel shame about how hard it is for you. Although if you are feeling shame, which you probably are, if you feel it, you're like halfway there, So like, I'm not going to tell you don't feel your shame. Just feel your shame. No big deal. We all have shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the core wound for everyone.
We absolutely do.
Yeah.
Rachel, thank you so much. I want to just acknowledge, like, from the very beginning of giving us techniques, from giving us a clarity of direction, and even now of just like telling us what's on the other end, and like and knowing like that's there. I feel like that is such an offering, a gift to be like, ooh, y'all, people have gotten to the other side. They have had the full poop. And it feels good, and it feels life is full, and life is plentiful and resilient to be in the hardships of life too. With that,
to feel the beauty of all of it. The pain is beautiful, and just remember, you'll keep pooping. Like, I do feel like I've healed my baseline, and I have that robust neutral, but I'm going to keep feeling, and so. I don't graduate clients when they're done having hard feelings. We'll never be done having hard feelings. We'll have less hard feelings. Yeah. We won't take it so seriously when we have hard feelings. We'll just know how to like get in, get out, wash up, and be less full of shit, lighter, brighter, and less full of shit.
Love it.
So thank you.
Thank you.
And Rachel, thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, that's so sweet of you.
I really do recognize you are really like holding a profound space in the field, and I'm excited to connect with you. I'd love to be involved, and I'm honored that you brought me into your audience. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. And thank you for giving us hope and all of us gently used humans out there. And how can they find more of you? In addition to reading your book, please all go get it. Feel, heal, and let that shit go. Your guide to emotional resilience and self-love.
You can find me at thefeelingsmovement.com, and that is feelings plural. Movement is like, yes, it's a revolution, and yes, it's a bowel movement. So thefeelingsmovement.com, and it has I have some coursework and some DIYs and access to classes, and then I have a membership, and all the things you'd want to know are there, and it will link you to my socials. My socials are either under that handle or under the name of my podcast, which is the Healing Feeling Sht Show. Amazing. But thefeelingsmovement.com is where it all is.
Go there, get it, let it go. Let that shit go.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. Fun. My pleasure. And to all of our gently used humans out there, we love you.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Gently Used Human podcast with Dr. Scott Lyons and friends. Visit gentlyused.com for fun extras. And don't forget to spill the tea and gossip about the show with all your friends and frenemies. And show some love by giving us 5 stars and leaving a review in your favorite apps. This helps us connect with all the other gently used humans out there. Oh, and by the way, you look fierce today.